let's talk through the Philadelphia Eagles, Super Bowl champions at the present moment. They lost Kellen Moore, their offensive coordinator. They also promoted from within Kevin Patullo, who was the passing game coordinator for this team from 2021 to 2024. So he has been there for a minute. He's basically been there the entire Nick Sirianni era. Obviously was with Sirianni in Indianapolis as well. So this, again, Patullo has been there for a minute here. So there is some continuity here. This team is a little bit, they're a little bit weirder to talk about, Boone, than the other two that we just talked about, because I like Kellen Moore, but I don't think we'd consider him in the same tier of play caller as guys like Liam Cohen and Ben Johnson. That's just my personal opinion. And even last year, like this, and even this offense, like last season, they won the freaking Super Bowl. They have stars all over the place, but they weren't that good on offense last year, or at least like they weren't at the level of Tampa Bay or Detroit. They were 7th in EPA per play. They were 14th in success rate. They were 13th in explosive play rate, and they were 6th in points per game. So I'm not saying they were a bad offense or Kellen Moore wasn't doing a good job, but every offense sort of just kind of turns into the same offense in Philadelphia there under Jalen Hurts. It's a little bit like the Russell Wilson effect in Seattle, where they keep cycling all these different coordinators, but they just do what makes the quarterback comfortable, which is not a bad thing at all. That's actually good coaching. However, we just saw this story play out a couple of years ago when Shane Steichen moves on in 2023. They lose Shane Steichen. They promote from within, then quarterback coach Brian Johnson, and that offense was pretty much a disaster in Philadelphia, and they had a very disappointing season. So it's a little bit different to talk about with this team. Where do you kind of come down on this Eagles offense with Kellen Moore out, Kevin Patullo getting promoted here?
This is another one where I'm not that worried about it. I'm, a little bit worried about the Super Bowl hangover. And I know that's a silly thing to bring up because it's not something that you could feel great about. But, every time I see a picture of Saquon Barkley out partying and everybody has drinks and everything around him, I go, okay, maybe I should be drafting a little more Will Shipley. But that being said, I'm not that worried about this offense. And like I said earlier, we were talking about, what you say versus what you do. Well, Scott Fishbowl started this week. The majority of the draft started this week. Mine did. And what did I do in the first 2 rounds? I was picking 7th. I got Saquon Barkley, who fell to me somehow there. And it's weird scoring in Scott Fishbowl, if anybody's wondering why he might fall to 7th. But I think he's more valuable than the 7th pick. And then what happened coming back around in the 2nd round? Jalen Hurts was there, and it's a super flex format. And I didn't necessarily expect that I was going to be taking 2 Eagles, but I ended up taking 2 Eagles to start my draft. So that tells you, I guess, how I feel about it, that I think this offense is going to continue to be fine. I'm not that worried about it. I like that you bring up the continuity aspect with Patullo, because when you think about what happened with Brian Johnson, right, he hadn't been with the team that long. So maybe this is a good thing that this time around, it'll be a little bit better. But I also think maybe we remember the scenario a little different because fantasy-wise, they weren't terrible that year. Like the offense did have its issues. And we remember, I think probably conflate, like we talked about earlier, a team's record versus what's happening fantasy wise with them. And, some of the sideline turmoil that we see sometimes in those highlights of, AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts getting mad at each other or not talking on the sidelines or whatever. And we think back to how bad it was, but fantasy wise, it wasn't that bad. I mean, Hurts was right up there near the top of the league. I think he finished 2nd in fantasy points per game. DeAndre Swift was a low-end RB2, which for DeAndre Swift is not that bad. AJ Brown, wide receiver 11 in fantasy points per game. DeVonta Smith, wide receiver 21. So these guys were kind of where they're going, and you just replace Swift with Saquon Barkley, and we know how that works out. So even if Barkley doesn't put up the kind of numbers that he put up last year, and I think that's the one area where it'd be very difficult for him to replicate the amazing season last year. And there's some spots where you could look at, all the times that he was tackled near the goal line. I think it was like 11 times that he was taken down near the goal line and then didn't score a touchdown. Some of that will switch around, but I look at this offense and I just look at the talent and those 4 guys in particular, and Hurts and Barkley and the 2 wideouts. And I just don't really see a scenario where these guys fail completely, barring some sort of injury striking.
No, it's a really good way of looking at it. I mean, the entire concept of this episode, like you see it on the lower third right now, like offenses that are too big to fail. The Eagles offense quite literally is too big to fail, right? Like it's too talented to fail because yeah, even that it's funny enough, like that 2023 offense, like they were 7th in EPA per play that year, success rate wise, they were 6th. They were actually better, like from a statistical standpoint than they were this past season. But I think we remember the Saquon Barkley season because that's the difference in putting DeAndre Swift, who's fine NFL running back, and Saquon Barkley behind this offensive line, this ecosystem. Obviously, that's the real difference maker there is that, yeah, that offense in Philadelphia that year, they were a good run team. Everybody knows that, but they were truly weaponized with Saquon Barkley back there. And all these guys too, like, yeah, they go early in drafts, right? So they're the team that you have to pay the most iron of the iron prices here to take these guys. Barkley is running back 2. Bijan Robinson, the only guy that's ranked ahead of him right now in consensus ADP. AJ Brown, wide receiver 10. Jalen Hurts, QB 4. DeVonta Smith, wide receiver 26. Dallas Goedert, like still tight end 13 hanging around there. Like these guys are going rather high, but as you mentioned, like that was a chaotic season in 2023. The whole team was disappointing. They were a little bit more disappointing on defense in 2023 than offense. That's totally fair to point out. Again, another coordinator change over there. Nevertheless, the offense, like they still scored fantasy points. And I feel like as long as all these guys are healthy and on the field, they'll score more fantasy points. And actually to that point, like if this team is, maybe it's a Super Bowl hangover, it's a slight step back for any reason, I actually think that might be more of a reason, Boone, to draft these wide receivers because AJ Brown, like he's still a top 4, 3, 5, whatever you want to put it, wide receiver in the NFL. DeVonta Smith is a total baller, one of, if not the very best number 2 receivers in the league. And if they're just in more like pass first game scripts, because they're not, leaning on teams with Saquon Barkley to the tune of 2,000 rushing yards, if AJ Brown gets targets, he could be the number 1 receiver in fantasy, like period, point blank.
Yeah, I think there's been some talk about them trying to be a little more vertical with the offense this year. And maybe that's the receivers, not enjoying the fact that Saquon Barkley stole so many headlines from them last year or so many highlights and some of that spotlight. Or maybe it's just a fact that year over year things change, right? And like you said, they could have to throw more this time around. Either way, I think those guys are going to be fine. I think the continuity of this entire offense is going to be something that just keeps them chugging along because I'm pretty sure the only spot that's really up for grabs right now is the right guard job, I think. And when you look at that offensive line, I would argue they're still the best offensive line in the league, right? The other 4 guys are all Pro Bowlers. They're all really excellent players. So they figure out that one spot and away we go and they just keep rolling there. So I think these guys are all going to be good. The one, and I don't want to feel like, it seems like I'm picking on tight ends. We didn't talk about Cade Otton when we were talking about the Bucks, but I wouldn't have had great things to say about him fantasy wise either. But when you look at Dallas Goedert, he's in that group of tight ends going back to the idea that he's never going to be, barring a bunch of injuries, one of the number 1 or number 2 target getters in the offense. Last year, I mean, his 2 biggest games yardage wise last season, AJ Brown was out. Smith missed part of one game and then completely missed the other. And yeah, Dallas Goedert had like a 170-yard week, and then I think the other one was like 62 yards or something like that. He's not the kind of guy that is going to go out there and make a difference for your fantasy team unless there's injuries to that receiving core. I used to always say this about Mike Gesicki when he was with the Dolphins, that you needed the receivers. You needed, who was there at the time? DeVonta Parker or, some of those guys. You needed the starters to go down in order for Gesicki to have these big weeks. And he did have them sometimes. And maybe with the Bengals, it's the same scenario, right? If we see T. Higgins miss time.
Oh, I mean, that's exactly what happened last year, right? Like, yeah.
Low-end tight end 1. He's that kind of guy. I think Goddard's kind of in that category as well, where he needs somebody else to get injured in order for him to step up. And I don't want to bank on that. I don't think there's any reason to. And again, you don't have to pay up for him like you have to pay up for the other guys. But he's not someone that I'm really drafting at all. I have him kind of way down the tight end 2 ranks. And I don't think he's a guy that people need to worry that much about because there's such a big group in that area. And I think there's just other guys that have a better chance to come through with a season that could actually do something for your fantasy team, where Goddard is really just the injuries. That's the main path for him.
Yeah. I mean, Number one, producer Colin, please make a note that we need to have like a tight end centric episode with Justin Boone here at some time, because I'm very curious about how you're actually ranking out this position, because people just always want to
say, tight ends I like. I promise.
No, yeah, no, I know. I'm sure there are, but it's such a great point. Like, there's tight ends is difficult for a number of reasons. One, because as you keep bringing up, like if you're not the number one or number two target, you're kind of banged. And like, guess what? Most NFL offenses do not want to run through the tight end as their number one target getter. And that just, like conceptually, that is just the way most of the progressions go. You really have to go out of your way to put that guy in a bunch of different alignments, like the Chiefs did with Travis Kelce in his prime, obviously what the Raiders did with Brock Bowers last year. I will go to my grave saying that like Norv Turner and Scott Turner were doing some really fun stuff for the Raiders when it absolutely did not matter at all anymore, but they were doing some real fun stuff to get Brock Bowers in these matchups last year. And obviously he was the tight end one overall. He's currently the tight end one. So again, we'll do a tight end show at some point, but even with Dallas Goedert specifically, this is a guy they tried to move on from in the offseason. They tried to like put him on the trade block, and guess what? Nobody was buying, so they kind of adjust his contract. He's back here for another year, but that just sort of goes to show that this team, I think they want to funnel through the wide receivers. I even think they want something more from that wide receiver 3 position. I'm stupid enough to still think that like if you gave him targets, Jahan Dotson could do things for you. They also have like Anaya Smith. They also have Johnny Wilson on the roster. They have some interesting wideouts. They have like Terrace Marshall hanging out right now, and we'll see if he even makes the team. I think they're searching for some more wide receivers. So yeah, Goddard's a guy that, yeah, again, he's tight end 13. He's not even really drafted as a fantasy starter right now in traditional formats, but certainly there are other guys going behind him that I would rather take as well.
Yeah, and it's too bad because, again, I don't want to repeat what I said with Laporta. I don't think Goddard is necessarily the same talent as Laporta, but I think he is a guy that if you put him in the right scenario, I kind of hope this offseason that he was going to get traded or moved in some way to another squad, because I'd like to see him be a top 2 target getter in an offense. I think he's the kind of guy that could produce with that. He's just not going to see that in Philadelphia. The other thing that we haven't really mentioned, we talked about Barkley a bit and like that, monster workload that he had last year. Are you somebody who like worries a lot about that? I feel like I don't worry about that as much. Like people are very concerned that he had so many touches last year. Is this going to be a problem for him this season? Are you somebody that's worried about that?
I mean, it's weird to say like, I'm not worried about it until I'm worried about it, if that makes any sense, because like, okay, if he goes out there and has another great season, nobody's going to ever bring up the touch count thing. But if he's hurt in like week 3 or something, there's, well, see, told you, always happens to these guys with these monster workload. And look, like, yeah, he touched the ball a ton during the regular season, and then they went to the friggin' Super Bowl. Okay, so he had a lot of wear on the tires. I'm actually glad that he didn't push for that rushing record, just so that, hey, like at least he got 1 week off last year, right? But yeah, man, I mean, it's one of those things that is a data point. Now, is it going to cause me to push Jahmyr Gibbs over him in rankings? Is it going to push Christian McCaffrey, who's the running back 4 in consensus ADP right now? Like, no, because again, there's concerns with those guys' profiles and things of that nature. But again, if he's hurt at some point this season, he has a slightly disappointing year, we'll all like point to that as the big cause of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I will say, as much as I haven't really been scared to draft Barkley like I just did in Scott Fishbowl, when it comes to Dynasty, I've been getting a lot of Will Shipley. I have been every rookie draft when I was making moves on the draft board, I'd always try to see who the Will Shipley manager was and try to go get him tossed in a deal. I think Shipley would be the guy, even though A.J. Dillon probably would get some work in that scenario. It probably wouldn't just be, Shipley stepping right in. But there's been a lot of positive buzz about Shipley. I think they really like him. I think there's a chance he even could get some work this year as like a change of pace guy if they are kind of want to take a little bit away from Barkley. There's been, some reports and some quotes that came out of OTAs that maybe Shipley could be a little more involved this year. But he's somebody that I like. If Barkley goes down, I think Shipley's going to be somebody that you want to have for fantasy. You could put up decent stats in this offense, not Barkley stats, but still be a pretty good fantasy starter for you in that scenario.